I am here with the wonderful Sharon McMahon, who needs very little introduction on this platform. You are all over it, and you are very successful speaking truth to power, educating people, using American history to help people understand what's going on today, which I think is so important.
Thank you.
And I loved your book, The Small and the Mighty, of course. It really helped Nora O'Donnell and I, when we were working on our book, kind of figure out the women that we wanted to profile and talk about and who was important. And
So nice.
yeah, it's a wonderful book. It's a wonderful read. I also can't believe that a woman wrote America the Beautiful. I had no idea.
Right? Yeah,
Yeah,
I know.
amazing.
And she made $5 from it. Throughout her entire lifetime, she made a total of $5 from America the Beautiful.
I'm sadly not surprised.
Yeah.
So I think what you're doing on this platform is wonderful and so important. And you're one of the most, one of the people that came to mind immediately when I thought of this project, because I think you are taking up space in a very male dominated world of American
Mhm.
history. And
Mhm.
I think that you are bravely kind of trying to point people in the direction of truth.
Mhm.
And I wondered from you, I'd love to get to know you better in terms of your background and the women in your life who have given you the confidence to really take up space in this male dominated
Mhm.
industry that we're both kind of in. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate that. That's very kind. I grew up in a smallish town in northern Minnesota, where it was a very insulated community. It's 150 miles from any large city. And when I got married, I became a teacher, and I taught in multiple states. I taught in Minnesota. I've taught on the West Coast, taught on the East Coast, worked in a variety of different schools with varieties of various student populations. And so that's really my background in terms of how I came to be interested in history and government. Like you usually become a teacher if you're going to teach secondary school in a subject that you have a proclivity towards, right? In a subject that you are good at, that you're interested in. And so that was true of me. I do feel like it is it's in many ways, it's my calling to be an educator. I had a very strange experience in which I felt like that was, I felt that very strongly. And that has not changed. Even though I am no longer in a public school classroom, I am still teaching. I'm still an educator, just in a different location.
Mhm.
But you're absolutely right that history, government, and politics are still largely male dominated. Now, people watching this are probably predominantly women
Mhm.
because that's who is probably in your audience and probably who's in my audience. So likely the people watching this right now are looking around and being like, I see mostly women here. And that's probably true. That doesn't negate the point, though, that more than 75% of history books are still written by men. That few women actually dominate the nonfiction hardcover bestseller charts. That most women who become like number one bestsellers are writing fiction, or they're writing memoirs,
Mhm.
or they're working in the personal development space. I'm thinking like a Mel Robbins type let
Yeah.
them theory. That is a separate bestseller list than the nonfiction hardcover bestseller list. So it's not to say there are no women on that list. Maggie Haberman is currently sitting on top of that list working in this space. But having pulled some of the data myself, it is still very largely male dominated in that region, and especially male dominated when it comes to history. And I think there's I have a few theories for why that is. But even though women have, better college achievement than men these days, even though there are far more women who are history teachers than men, despite all of those facts, the majority of history books are written by men, and they're largely written for male audiences and consumed by male audiences.
And they're leaving out, I think, a lot of when we were researching our book, and I'm sure you find this every day, I love David McCullough, and he wrote a book. His famous breakout book was about the Brooklyn Bridge. But the woman who helped build the bridge, Emily Warren Roebling, was kind of a side. She was mentioned maybe, a handful of times in his
Right.
book.
When she was doing the bulk of the work at the end.
Right. It's
Yes.
it's infuriating. So I think
Mhm.
that what you are doing is trying to right that ship a little bit. And
Mm.
I'm curious, because this show is about how she led to me and the women in your life who have made you feel this confidence. And you mentioned that you had an event, like, was there one thing that happened where you felt a calling to
Mhm.
do this job? What was it?
Yeah, I was in college and I had decided that I wanted to be a physician. I'm still interested in medicine, like as a just as a topic of general interest. And so I was on this sort of like pre-med path doing cadaver dissections, like working in anatomy lab. I had a friend that was on the same path as I was, and we commiserated about this frequently. And I was sitting in a class one day, and the class was perfectly pleasant. There was nothing like I was interested in the topic. There was no reason for me to feel any amount of discontent about what was happening. I was doing like I did well in school. Like there was no precipitating reason for this to have occurred. And I felt in this moment, sitting in this university class. This sort of knowing descend upon me. And I wouldn't say that I heard a voice, but the best way I can describe it is that it wasn't a beam of light, but that's the best way I can describe it, is like this knowing descended upon me. That and I the knowing was, you are meant to be a teacher. And I, like, in that moment, I felt like that is absolutely correct. And I never had one moment of like, are you kidding me? They make 1/10 of the money. Like, are
Right.
you kidding
Right.
me? Like, I never had a moment of like, are you kidding me? That's wrong.
Really?
No, never.
And your
And I
parents
still,
never had, were your parents like, we thought you were going to be a doctor. We thought you were going to make all this
my
money.
parents were perfectly supportive. There was never, my parents never pushed me to become a physician either. Like my grandfather was a teacher. Like my parents supported whatever I wanted to do. So there was no like, I don't know, is that a good decision? Like that conversation never happened.
Good.
Mhm,
That's impressive
mhm,
because teaching is very altruistic. And you were saying, in a way, I mean, you worked in schools. We live in Bethesda. You worked in DC
mhm.
public school system, and I think that for you, when you were working, was it really a huge part of it was trying to bring these untold stories to kids and seeing
Mm.
the reaction when they learn about these women?
Yeah, I mean, I think humans are naturally curious about behind the scenes. They're naturally curious about things that are hidden, things that are secret, something you never knew. Like how many documentaries and etc. are based on like the untold story of the Hindenburg. You know what I mean? Like the the
Yeah.
people are naturally very curious about this,
Hmm.
and that includes adolescents. We want to know the tea.
Yeah.
And so if I said, okay, Brooklyn Bridge, feat of engineering, incredible, blah, blah, blah. Here's the history. This is all connected to, the history of New York, which there's no place like it in the world. Like I could go into this whole spiel and people would be like, great, Brooklyn Bridge. But as soon as you bring up, and it was secretly engineered by a woman, and they had to go to great pains to never tell anyone. Because if they told people, no one would want to cross it. If they told people, they would assume it was going to fall down. If they told people, like that framing of a story is far more interesting to not just adolescents, but to adults today than just like, here's the feat of engineering that is the Brooklyn Bridge.
Of course, I completely agree. And it's peeking behind the curtain, which is what everybody wants. So, who in your life growing up made you curious? made you, you say that you think everyone's intellectually curious to an extent. I don't, I like to think that's true, but I think that you have to have somebody who's encouraging you to read,
Mhm.
who takes you seriously
Yeah.
when you make it, have a conversation at the dinner table about politics or
Yeah.
history. And who
Yeah,
was,
I think that's true. I mean, I do think humans are innately curious, but I do think intellectual curiosity has to be fostered.
yes.
Because we do sort of revert to our, you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, speaking of education, like we revert to getting our basic needs met. And these intellectual pursuits at the top of this pyramid have to be fostered, and you have to have some of your basic needs met. But I will say that my mom was always a reader. My mom gave me and encouraged me to spend as much time as I wanted at the library. I grew up a block from a branch library, and it was very small, cute little library, very like historic building. But the branch library was only open, episodically. It was not open every single day, from 8 to 5, the way the main library was. It was staffed, like a couple days a week. So on days that I didn't go to the branch library, or I felt like I had checked out all of the books on the topic that I was interested in that the branch library had, I would take the bus to the main downtown library, or my mom would drop me off at the main downtown library. And we had our whole, like, I had the pamphlets of the bus schedule because this was, of course, before apps told you when the bus was coming. And we together, we'd be like, okay, you are going to take the 4:20 bus home. It's going to say this on the top. And, like once I got on the bus, I knew where I was going. And then if you miss the 4:20 bus, there's another one at 4:50. Like we would have this
I
exact
love that.
conversation of like how to get home. And that was not just developing a sense of autonomy, of like the sense of confidence that I can manage to get on a bus on my own at age 12, which children are perfectly capable of, by the way. 12-year-old children ride the subway in New York, which is far more complicated than
Yes.
riding a bus in a straight line.
Yeah.
But I was also responsible for, keeping track of my books and keeping the receipts of when all of these things were due. My mom's rule was always, you can only bring home as many books as you can carry. And so, of course, I developed more ways to carry things. I just brought a tote bag and a backpack. I was not constrained by what I could hold in my arms. I had additional carrying methods. And the library was such an incredible gift to me growing up. There's no expectation of spending money, and my parents didn't have money when I was growing up. My parents were lower middle class. There were multiple times where my parents were having financial difficulty with my dad's employment, and my parents were on government assistance. So I did not grow up being able to go to a bookstore, even though I liked them, and just be able to buy whatever I wanted.
Mm.
The library was a really, really important institution in my life, and actually still is. I can afford to buy books now. Like I have plenty of
Yeah.
books at my house, and I still love the library. I still patronize the library. I still go to the library. The library still has such amazing, like the potential in the library is infinite. It
Hmm.
feels infinite to me. And, it's the most democratic institution on earth. There is no barrier to accessing the knowledge. In college, there's barriers to the knowledge. Obviously, you need money. And even if you get a scholarship and you have your school entirely paid for, you have to take like the prerequisite classes to be able to get to the higher level classes. It's understandable why that is true, but the library erects no such barriers.
Yeah.
Would you want to learn about advanced physics? Go ahead and knock yourself out. Like if you don't get it, okay, you can look for other information elsewhere.
You can
So,
lose yourself in a library.
yeah.
You're so right. And there's something about the smell of almost every library I've been in. It
Mhm.
shares that same. And the idea of just losing yourself in someone else's story, which I think nonfiction and fiction alike do so well. Would your mother have considered herself a feminist? And I feel like you are a feminist, but it is
Mhm.
such a loaded word. And I
Mm,
really don't think it should be.
I don't think so either.
Um,
Yeah.
grew up with that in your
No,
worldview.
I don't think my mother considered herself a feminist in the sense of like, if you put a microphone, are you a feminist?
Yeah,
In her mind, she would have envisioned that word as like Gloria Steinem, Ms.
yeah,
Magazine. That's how she would have
bra burning.
conceptualized,
Yeah,
exactly. She would have conceptualized feminism. So I don't think she had an attachment to that word. But she certainly believed in equality. She certainly believed that um, I was as smart as anybody else. And, like in fact, I was probably smarter than a lot of the boys in my class. She never encouraged me to put children down, of course, but there was never a sense of like, you are limited
yeah.
because of your gender, or you shouldn't be a physician because that's not a job for girls, or like girls need to stay home. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. She did stay home. She did have many of those very stereotypical gender roles. She cooked dinner and she cleaned the house, and she embodied many of the things that women have done, the caretaking that women have done for millennia. And you can be a feminist and do those things, by the way.
You can.
They're not mutually exclusive, but
Yes.
um, so I
Does
don't
she
think.
see you now, by the way? Does she see you now and say, is she so proud of you and the
Oh,
work that
yes. Oh my
you
gosh. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. I mean, my mom, she'll read something that I have written and be like, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever read. Like I don't think any of that is, it's not a, Russian novel. But in her mind, she's extremely proud of me, and her cohort of friends, my mom's friends are so proud of me. Do you remember growing up and like you had at least a tangential relationship with your mother's friends?
Yes. Yes.
Like your mom's friends would call her on the phone, and you could overhear your mom talking to her friends on the phone. They would come over. You would do stuff with your mom's friends' kids. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like my
100%.
mom's friends were also sort of like figures in my life. And so my mom's friends are still among some of my biggest fans. They're like, oh, little Sharon. Like it's so cute that they just think it's so adorable. So, yeah.
I love that. You're right. We've kind of lost some of that with iPhones and the kind of way
Yeah,
that
with texting. Yes.
yeah. My kids haven't aren't they don't know some of my friends, right? There
Yeah.
isn't friends' moms and all that stuff. Yeah, that was a wonderful thing growing up in the 80s. I remember that distinctly
And
going,
you had a house phone, and I
yes.
would answer the phone, and my mom and I had very similar speaking voices, and her friends would constantly confuse us. I'd answer the phone and they'd be like, Julie? And I'd be like, no, it's Sharon.
You could do it
They'd be like,
yourself.
oh, Sharon, what are you doing today? Like, we'd have like a little conversation. So I do think that, like, I mean, I have 4 children, and I own it. My children do not have the relationship with
Yeah.
most of my friends that I had with my mother's friends. I think
It's
that's absolutely true.
it's too bad. That's too bad. That's something I've never thought of actually. Thank you for bringing that up. That's really
Mhm.
interesting. Um, one other thing so are there other women, are there teachers, are there friends, are there people that encourage you? Because you really started your big social media presence during the pandemic, right? That's when you really got there and you saw a need for this. Who in your life said, you know what, Sharon, I think you have something really important to teach people and they need to.
Mhm.
Was it just kind of completely self motivated, or was there someone in your life who did that?
Well, I don't know that this person is somebody who could reached out to me and said, you need to be making videos on the internet, but I will say it's kind of a unique story in that um, a year and a half or so into doing what I was doing on the internet, I got invited to the George W. Bush Presidential Library to do an event there. And the event was celebrating the opening of a new exhibit with original copies of the Declaration of Independence and the Magna Carta, and like this, the Presidential Library is also a museum. If people have not been there, it's a very interesting museum. And so I went to this event, and George W. is introducing me. And we had this very funny moment in the green room before I went out on stage. And the moderator of this panel
Mhm.
asked me, because I am a longtime teacher, asked me about teachers that I had had in my life. And I've had a number of really good teachers. But I pointed to one teacher in particular who was my first grade teacher. And I was a very voracious reader, even as a first grader. And she always, vividly remember her struggling to find books to keep me interested, but
Mhm.
that were also subject matter appropriate, because as you go up in reading level, you also go up in themes that are not always appropriate for a 6-year-old, right? Like they're finding, for lack of a better term, wholesome books
Mhm.
that are at an appropriate reading level. For me was a challenge for her, and I distinctly remember her being like, let's try this book, let's try this book. So I remembered um, saying her name on this stage, and describing that, she had so much faith in my ability to read and to learn whatever I set my mind to. And it turned out, I had not spoken to her in so many years, and it turned out that she was watching the live stream of this event. And I had no idea. Like I said, I had not spoken to her in
Great.
my entire adult life. You know what I mean? Like since I left home and moved away, I had not spoken to her. Um, but she had heard about it maybe through following me on social media, and she was watching the live stream. And that night, I got an email from her saying that she had been watching me, and she was so proud, etc. Since then, she's come to a number of my events. She sends me emails pretty regularly, being like, "Would you please educate us on this topic? Like I would like to learn more about X, Y, and Z things." And I don't know how old she is now, but she's certainly older than me. She's my first grade teacher. But
Right.
she's still very, very engaged in who I, she's very invested in who I
Mhm.
am becoming. And not just who I became. I grew up to become an author and a mother and a teacher and like all of these things, but who I am continuing to become.
Wow.
And that is the mark of a really wonderful teacher, right? That she doesn't just care
Yeah.
about like print your name more neatly, um, but
Yeah.
she still to this day cares about who I am
Oh,
becoming. And I think that's really wonderful.
what's her name?
Her name when she was my teacher was Miss Kantner, but she got married after she was my teacher, but her first name is Sally.
Oh, I love that. Is there anybody who you have taught through the years who you feel that same connection with, who you're watching them become something
Yes, yes,
incredible?
I am still in touch with a number of my students. Some of them have gone on to do like really incredible things. Some of them work as like showrunners on huge Hollywood TV shows. Some of them are like the director of public health for an entire state. Some of them work in like the North Atlantic Council. Like some of these youngsters, which is so crazy because like they're still 16 years old in my mind. Like, how are you in charge of foreign policy? But they're obviously killing it. They're obviously doing an incredible job.
I love
Um, yeah, it's so fun to see. It truly
it.
is.
It's like a piece of you that is still that is imparted something to them, just like
I
your teacher.
feel so proud of them. I don't take responsibility or credit for their success, but I do feel very, very proud of who they are.
Is there any other woman in your life who you'd want to mention who has helped you? Is there I found when talking to people, they often mention grandmothers
Yes. Hmm.
because I also think that the relationship between a grandmother and a
Hmm.
grandchild is it's much less loaded, complicated.
Yeah.
It's not it's just pure loving
Yeah.
in many circumstances. Did
Yeah.
you have that grandmother in your life?
I did. I sure did. You're right that the grandmother relationship is much less. There are far fewer landmines of, did you do your homework? No,
Yeah.
you can't go to your friend's house. Like that's not usually present in that relationship with your
Crazy.
grandma.
Yeah.
But my grandma had a number of physical disabilities that made her housebound at the end of her life. She was mostly blind. She had mobility issues. So I spent a lot of time with her because she was alone and she did not have a lot of ability to go out and interact with the world. But before she had all of these sort of physical maladies, she was a very, very accomplished professional musician. This is my mother's mother, very accomplished professional musician. And I frequently spent the night at her house when I was growing up, frequently spent the night. She had all the good snacks, like she had all the sugar that I was not allowed to eat at home. The freezer was always full of miniature Snickers, and she would buy me Honey Nut Cheerios to eat for breakfast, and like all the things that my mom deemed not healthy enough to eat regularly. My grandma had. That's the job of grandma, right?
Of course.
And she had cable, which we did not have at my house. So going to my grandma's house, I was just like eating Snickers and watching Nick at Night and, like having fun talking to my grandma. Um,
Yes.
and she had a number of very funny things that I look back on that, things that she believed. But one of the things that I look back on her now for that I didn't appreciate when she died when I was 15, but I didn't appreciate at the time was how much she just met people where they were. She had friends from all walks of life. She had friends that were different religions than her, different races than her, different ages than her. And she just knew how to love people without judgment. Her friend Verna had the following challenges in her life, but boy, she also had so many good things to say about Verna. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
she didn't judge her for
Yeah.
having those, fill in the blank, whatever my grandma's
Mhm.
perceptions were. So,
Mm.
um, the idea of meeting somebody where they are is in some ways really has become a bigger and bigger lost art, in my opinion.
Yes.
We have moved into a phase of our culture where we make immediate judgments about somebody. We don't give them space to change. And we immediately deem them as being good or bad.
Mhm.
You're on the right side of history, you're on the wrong side of history. That person voted for that person and thus they are terrible.
Yeah.
And I do understand where this comes from. Humans are hardwired to make quick judgments about things because that has, from an evolutionary perspective, has kept us safe.
Yeah.
We don't have time to analyze whether that's a nice wolf or a mean wolf on the hill. Run away. Do you know what I mean? Like
Right.
those shortcuts in our mind,
Yeah.
we have become very adept at building those. So I'm not saying that I don't understand why people's propensity to, factionalism is
Yeah.
there. I do understand it. But I do think that when we have, sorted people into factions of like, you're with me or you're against me, that historically that has not led us to good
No.
destinations.
Mm-mm.
That sense of othering people, that sense of dehumanizing people, has not led us places we should want to go. And
Mhm.
I see as a culture, I see us, steering the ship in this direction. And it becomes very difficult for somebody who has been othered by this, if you're in this group, that group's terrible. If you're in this group, that group's terrible. It becomes
Mhm.
very difficult for the group that you're not in to ever learn or redeem themselves or to change or to improve. And even if you're friends with somebody in the group that you are not a part of, you're tainted by extension because you had a conversation with somebody that other person disagreed with. And I'm not advocating for, accepting behavior that should not exist. I'm not saying, well, sometimes pedophiles can change.
Right.
I'm not saying that. I'm talking about normal
Mhm.
variations in human beliefs and et cetera. Um,
Yeah.
I see in my grandmother somebody who was willing to be friends with all kinds of people, and who thought that she could learn something from everyone.
That's so beautiful and so rare. I think you're
Mm.
right that it is the moment that we're in, and it's been like this for a long time, I think, actually, where it's much more comfortable to silo people
Mhm,
and
mhm,
to not be as accepting as we should be. And it's hard when we have a president who is speaking and using this kind of verbiage that is
mhm.
all about,
It's becoming very normalized. Mhm,
yes, which is
mhm,
scary.
mhm,
Do you think that one thing I want to make sure I ask you before we go is because I love this question. Is there something you still feel like you need to prove when you meet people? Do you think that are you comfortable in yourself? Have the women in your life given you this self-confidence where you still feel like you've kind of risen to this level of, um, be having this platform and you don't need to necessarily prove anything else. I think there is a feeling of that a lot of women have of taking up space in a male dominated place like American history is difficult, and I find what you're doing so inspirational because you don't
mm,
seem to, it doesn't seem like you feel like you need to prove anything. What is that an accurate is that accurate?
mm. That's a great question. That's very interesting to hear other people's perception of you, right? Because
Yeah.
inhabiting your own mind is different than seeing it from somebody else's through someone else's eyes. Um, I do still find, I wouldn't say this is how I feel like I need to prove myself, but I do still find this very interesting. My friend Adam Grant teaches at Wharton, and he teaches like MBA students. And one of the questions that he asks his students when they come in on their first day of class is he asks them to write down three leaders that they admire. And people have a big range of heroes, sports heroes, Abraham Lincoln,
Yeah.
Warren Buffett, like
Standard.
fill in the blank, right? Like
Yeah.
they have a big range of people that they admire. um he says that even today, women usually write down a mixture of men and women that they admire. They will
Mm.
write down Abraham Lincoln, but they will also write down whatever, Michelle Obama, or, fill in the
Yeah.
blank. They will write down men and women. Men almost exclusively write down men.
Mm.
Even in 2026,
Wow.
men do not admire or respect the leadership of women in the United States. And that I see this as being true even in my own community, which is 90% women. I, sometimes jokingly say that the 10% of the dudes are mostly the significant others and the friends of women who have like dragged them here. Do you know what I mean? My wife made me come to this. Um, I
Yeah.
followed you because my wife wouldn't shut up about you and I needed to see what was happening. Um, it is still true in America
Yeah.
that the leadership and expertise of women is thought of as less than
Yes.
primarily by men. That's not to say that no women devalue the expertise of women, but women have been socialized to believe that both men and women can be leaders.
Yes.
And men who are adults today have largely been socialized to believe that men are leaders.
Yeah. And
This is perhaps one reason we have difficulty electing females or women in
yeah.
politics, why women don't
Mhm.
ascend to the CEO role or the C-suite roles in business nearly as often, why female-led businesses tend to, be viewed as small businesses, even though female-fronted Fortune 500 companies statistically perform better than the ones fronted by men. Um,
How interesting. I didn't know
yeah.
that.
Mhm.
It's about
Yeah.
strength, right? Isn't it? Don't you feel like it's that men have grown up believing, boys grow up believing they have to be strong.
Mhm.
and women don't have. I mean, there's this strength that men admire in each other, and when a woman is strong, she's difficult, right? I
Yeah.
mean, there's that kind of, it's a pervasive, ridiculous
Yeah.
stereotype, which is why we haven't had a female president, in my view, which
Mhm.
is why we have a female president. So one day,
Mhm.
hopefully that will change. Do you think it will change sooner than later, that we might get a woman in our lifetime in the White House?
Well, it depends on how long we live. Uh, no, I do think we will have a female president in my lifetime. Hopefully, I live long enough to see it. I do think that that day is coming. I do think attitudes are softening. I do think that's true. But I still contend with, let me just give you one example very briefly. Um, this notion of patriarchy, of course, is um, perpetuated by men, but it is also propped up by women, and we have to acknowledge that. I recently had somebody tell me on social media that I wasn't being nice enough to people who are openly racist on the internet. I wasn't being nice enough to them. And that was a woman who was telling me that I wasn't being nice enough to this white man who was being openly racist on the internet. And I don't just mean like subtle, I mean like overtly racist. Um, and that's an example of how women help perpetuate these patriarchal notions of niceness. Like a woman's highest value is when she is displaying the behaviors of niceness at all
Yes.
times. And so when it comes to like, what do you still have to prove? I don't feel like I need to prove to people that I'm smart or that I can accomplish things or that I, can run a company or, like, I don't feel like I have to prove that. But I do still feel that there is a glass ceiling that is pervasive, not just above my own head, but above the heads of many women. That women's highest value is in being nice, and if you are not nice, then you are something below nice, and that we're going to use that as a means of insulting, judgment, devaluing, belittling, and so to me, that is still something that women in America have to prove that we're worth more than niceness.
I love that. And if anyone tells you to smile more, I've got,
Mhm,
like,
mhm,
come on. That is, no one would ever tell a man to smile more.
mhm, mhm.
Um, so I hope that we were able to get to some of the women in your life. I really loved hearing about your teacher and your mother. And I think that what you're doing is just fantastic. And I'm a huge, huge fan.
Thank
And
you.
so it means a lot for me that you decided to do this. So thank you
Thank
very
you. Thanks for inviting me.
much.
And congrats on We the Women. It was you had to be super psyched with how well it was received.
Oh yeah, it was fantastic, and I really enjoyed working on it with Nora because she does practice what she preaches. She
Yeah,
does prop up other women, and
yeah,
to your point, not every woman does that, especially in
that's true.
journalism. It's very cutthroat,
Yeah,
and so in fact, she. I will just quickly end with she has this reputation for having assistants for a couple of years because not because she gets sick of them, but because she wants them to go on to do something better and bigger. And so
yeah,
now her assistant is in the investigative unit at CBS, which is, I think, speaks a lot to
yeah,
her character. So
yeah. I love that.
me too. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks for having
you.
me. It was good to see you. Good to be with everybody today.
Yes, thank you, everybody.
Yes.
Thanks, Sharon.
Bye.
Bye.